I'd just say,
you know, if we keep the surplus, we have these spending cuts, could that push Australia into recession?
I don't think that the fiscal policy will have a huge impact. Swan surplus is a complete furphy. There's absolutely no way it will happen. It's at best a sleight of hand, and at worst completely misleading and almost fraudulent. If this was a public company presenting figures and forecasts in such a manner, I suspect they'd be investigated and shouted down.
All right, well, just back a step. I mean, you've told us what you really think. How do you get to that point that it's a fraud and a furphy?
Well, firstly, there's several $billion in public service efficiency dividends which have been just made up. He's brought forward $37 billion in spending, which is simply just moving from one year to the next. As Tony said, we're talking 0.3% of the net, so 1.5 billion out of 371.5 billion. So
yeah,
it's what,
tiny.
0.26% of the total income. He's just made up a number, and he's hoping for the best. And they'll either not be in office by then, or they'll have another couple of years. So, and then going back to the last segment, what we're all saying about China, it's based so much on the continued growth of China, which is again I'd say highly unlikely. That the numbers, if you believe them, they got inflation of 5.6% and growth of 9%. They're running huge amounts of credit. The local governments are lending billions and billions of dollars to fund these ghost cities. There's 25 metres of square feet of office space for every single man, woman in China in the whole country, man, woman, child in the whole country. It's a humongous bubble, probably the biggest the world's ever seen, being backed up by these so-called claims and based on Chinese government data, which nobody can believe.
Yeah,
so
it is scary when you see the vision of all those empty apartments and office blocks. You just think, well, you know, they're never going to be filled. But sorry, go on.
I was in China recently and speaking to people, and there were, apart from the fact there were thousands of buildings just sitting there, you speak to locals and they talk about massive inflation, and the cost of everyday items in Beijing was more expensive than Melbourne. In Beijing, a country that has $8,000 GDP per person compared to $57,000 for Australia. So you've got a hugely inflationary situation, largely caused by China's peg to the US dollar, where they just, and Stephen mentioned the 3.2 trillion in reserves. The only two other countries to build up huge foreign reserves are the US before the Depression and China before its 20-year depression. So global reserves are important for bad things to come, not good things to come. It's happened through huge credit growth over the last 10 years.
Stephen Mayne, is this view from you on what you think is going to happen next week at the RBA meeting?
Oh, don't care. I think what
oh, don't care. Come on, you've got to show you care a bit.
Sorry. I should say I don't care what the RBA will do, because I think that said, they're actually being one of the more responsible central banks, if not the most responsible central bank. But
yes,
the point of interest rate settings is, and I don't necessarily agree with Stephen, that the point of interest rate settings is to try and determine a level between saving and spending. And I guess you've got to ask now, should Australians be spending or should Australians be saving? You can ask that all over the world.
Yeah.
You look at the last 20 years, we've spent too much. Other countries have spent even more, but we've spent too much, and it's gone to overpriced housing, into too much discretionary spending, into various areas. The point of a higher interest rate is encourages savings. You lower the interest rate, you penalise savers, you reward spenders. Should we be rewarding spenders? I'd say we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be encouraging high-spending Christmas lunches and spending $1,000 at David Jones.
It's a fair enough point, because I mean, Australians are still in debt to a great extent, aren't they, Adam? Stephen wants to take it up with you.
David Jones had a 10% real cut in their sales figures in the last quarter. We have record savings not seen since the Whitlam era. So we are saving. We don't need to keep rewarding savers. We actually need to provide some relief to the retailers who are getting slaughtered by the high dollar
and by
the retailers are being slaughtered because they're inefficient, not because people aren't spending. Because the retailers are getting killed by online retailers and more efficient retailers.
It's only 3.8%.
Retailers will make money.
Only 4% of total sales, we heard at the David Jones AGM today, is online, and most of that is Amazon and Apple. They said it's the record savings thing which is killing them at the moment, and for that I say we've got to cut interest rates to get people spending a little bit.
They've done everything. Go on.
I don't think we should be. I don't think we should be cutting interest rate levels to benefit Paul Zara's executive compensation or reward David Jones shareholders who shouldn't have bought shares in the first place. So the point of an interest rate setting isn't to reward a certain sector of the economy, be it retailers or anybody. It should be to create long-term productive growth and to invest in industries that will serve us for years and decades to come, not to reward certain sectors.
All right, Tony.
Look, I know.
You about this or any other AGM that you've been watching this week?
Talking about Soul Pats, Stephen's right in a sense, but on the flip side, there's two types of public companies you can buy. You can buy into a company like BHP with a very wide open register, or you can buy into a company like News Corp or Crown or Soul Pats, which has a locked register. You buy a share in Pats or Brickworks and you know that you're not getting a controlling stake. You know that you're at the whim of what the Milners want to do. So you go in with your eyes open. It's a bit like buying a share in Berkshire Hathaway. That under typical corporate governance norms, Berkshire Hathaway fails every possible test. Riskmetrics in the States a couple of years ago controversially recommended against quite a few of its resolutions. So there are two types of companies. If you're talking about BHP, 100% agree. They shouldn't be able to operate in this manner. But if I was to buy a share in Soul Pats, I know what I'm getting myself into, and I shouldn't expect the same, as long as they're delivering good returns, which they are.
Adam,
so while Stephen is technically... Sorry, Steve.
Adam, what is wrong with the largest shareholder, Perpetual, representing millions of Australians through compulsory superannuation? What is wrong with them having 1 out of 9 seats on the board? They're not asking to control it, they're just asking for basic minority shareholder representation.
Adam?
But Perpetual would have known before they bought the shares they weren't going to get representation. So why coming to the nuisance?
Because of your point that it's a locked register. Tony, do you have
They
a view
knew what they were
about
getting
this?
into.
Look, I think